Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan Hill with the Oswego Lake Watershed Council, and I'm so glad you're here tonight for Discover the Fascinating World of Lake Oswego's Bees webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that this event is being recorded so that you are able to review it once we're done or pass it on to friends. We've got a really fun and informative evening ahead, and I think you're going to walk away with a whole new appreciation for the tiny pollinators buzzing around our community. Before we jump in, I just want to share a little bit about the organization behind tonight's event. The Oswego Lake Watershed Council is a small nonprofit working hard to keep our watershed and the plants, animals, and people who depend on it healthy. We do this through hands-on restoration, education, and partnerships across the community. We're always thinking big picture, from forested headwaters to Oswego Lake itself. We support conservation efforts that help the whole ecosystem thrive. Our mission is to foster stewardship, education, and community participation to restore and protect our local watershed. Our vision is a landscape where creeks, wetlands, forests, and neighborhoods work together to support clean water, native wildlife, and a better quality of life for all. I would also like to share our commitment to equity. We know that the way we care for the land is shaped by many perspectives, especially those that have historically been left out of Western science. We're working to be more inclusive and to listen to those voices as we plan and carry out our work. We believe that the health of the watershed is tied to how we listen, collaborate, and grow as a community. Next, I have a few Zoom housekeeping notes for the evening. As I mentioned, tonight's webinar is being recorded. You have all been muted to keep background noise down. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat instead of hand raising. It helps our presenters stay focused, and I'll be monitoring the chat to make sure we catch your questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. So what are we going to learn tonight? We will explore the incredible diversity of bee species in the Lake Oswego area, from the mighty bumblebee to the tiny miner bees. You'll learn which flowers bees prefer, where to spot their nesting sites, what looks like a bee but isn't, and much more. We'll also cover bee-friendly practices you can adopt in your own yard and hear about how you can advocate for bees and support policies that protect pollinators and their habitat. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce tonight's presenters. We are lucky to be joined by two fantastic speakers. First up will be Leah Puhlman. She is a master gardener, bee enthusiast, and educator. She has worked with mason bees, contributed to the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, and transformed her home garden into a certified wildlife habitat. Leah promotes compassionate gardening, an approach that supports wildlife while connecting to personal memories and meaning through plants. Celeste Mayfrin Swango is the director of Environment Oregon, where she leads campaigns to protect clean water, reduce pollution, and promote environmental justice. She's also the author of Myrtle the Turtle, a children's book that inspires action to prevent ocean plastic pollution. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. We're excited to learn together, and we hope this inspires you to see your own yard, park, or neighborhood as a space full of pollinator potential. So let's get started. Leah, I'm going to pass this on to you.
Okay, can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm really glad you could join us this evening to discover the hidden treasure all around us, bees. And tonight, we're going to spend some time taking a closer look at the bees that are in your backyard, right outside your door, but that often go unnoticed. And we're going to explore some of the surprising places that they build nests and how you can how they care for their young, and some of their favorite flowers. Yes, some of them are very picky eaters. And can we talk about the fashion show that bees provide? Look at the beautiful colors and textures just in these 4 bees found in my yard. But first, I'm going to close off my video because I don't want to have to look at myself while I'm doing this. And I want you to just focus on the bees and the pictures we've got. And I want to tell you a short story about how I became obsessed with bees. One day, I was down on my hands and knees and weeding the area by my blueberry bushes. And I saw these tiny little holes in the ground, and I wondered what made them. When I looked more closely, I saw this. No, it's not an earthquake. That's just really bad camera technique. But yes, that is a bee going into the digging in the ground. And it's a teeny tiny bee. At first, I thought, is that a flying ant? And to show you the scale of this bee, here's one on a wild strawberry blossom. The strawberry blossom is an inch wide, and the bee is about 1/4 inch long. And as I researched it later, I found out that this was an andrina or mining bee. And I thought, and though they're small, they're great pollinators. Look at the pollen collected on her hind legs here. So even though I've been a gardener for most of my life, I never paid attention to some of the small creatures living in my yard. I'm sure many of you are the same way, which is why, drum roll please, we're inviting you to spend some time joining us for a Bee BioBlitz June 7th and 8th. I've included this video of my front yard to give you an idea of the number of bees in just a small 8x8 section of the garden. And there we go. It should be a little lagging here. I'm sorry I couldn't get the sound going, but it's just alive with buzzing. So what is BioBlitz? I'm so glad you asked. The area of BioBlitz is an event that focuses on finding and identifying as many species as possible in a specific area over a short period of time. The area we're focusing on is Lake Oswego. And it's simple. You go outside and look around for bees. Here's a pro tip. Flowers are a really good place to start. When you find a bee, you take a picture with your phone. I like to take a lot of pictures in hopes that I can get at least one or two that are in focus. And when you submit photos to iNaturalist, it's helpful to get a bee from different angles to help with identification from the citizen scientist community. iNaturalist is a free online social network and citizen science project where users can record and share observations of living things, contributing to a global database of biodiversity information. But June 7th and 8th, we're just going to be focusing on bees and bee-like creatures in Lake Oswego. Why does this matter? Well, there have been 4,337 species of bees identified in North America and Hawaii. We only have the conservation status of 7.3%. That's 317 species out of the 4,337. And of those, only 133 species are secure. It means they're not in danger of extinction. So that means 184 species of the very small number of bees that we can identify are vulnerable to extinction. And the other 4,207, we just don't know how they're doing. We have over 500 native bees in Oregon, and unfortunately, our understanding of the status of most of our native bees in Oregon is poor, and it's difficult to understand their status without additional contemporary and historic data. And that's where Bee BioBlitz comes in. So bee populations are in decline due to a combination of human-caused stressors, including habitat loss, climate change, and pesticide exposure. And efforts are continuously in place to improve sustainability in agriculture pest management to minimize habitat fragmentation. So by joining in the Bee BioBlitz, you're helping to document the different bee species that we have in our neighborhoods. And you may be surprised at the variety of bees you can find just by looking closely at the flowers around you. You can also find bees by looking for their nesting sites, and we're going to get up close and personal with some local bees to see where they live and how they behave. Urban gardeners can help provide a refuge space for wild bees. A bee refuge contains flowering plant species for food and both soil and cavity nesting sites. And at the end, we're going to explore 8 very simple steps that everyone can take to create bee-friendly gardens and help our native bees thrive. Both bumblebees and honeybees are often the first bees you see in the spring. It's not uncommon for them to be seen on a nice day in February or March, and they're easy to spot. There are a lot of them, and they're a good size. And when you say bees, people frequently think of honeybees and bumblebees. That's the first image that they get. Social bees live in colonies and they interact in very complex and sophisticated ways. There's a division of labor: egg laying, foraging, caring for young, and in some cases, taking out the trash and defending the nest. Bumblebees have much smaller colonies than honeybee hives. So, for most people, when they think of bees, again, they immediately picture a honeybee. And that's understandable because they're everywhere all at once. But they're not native to North America. They were brought to America from Europe. They're social bees that congregate together in very large colonies of 40,000 to 100,000. So they were brought to North America in 1622. Why? Well, they're easy to transport. You can put honeybees in a box and put them on a ship and ship them over the ocean. And the people coming from Europe to North America brought them because they knew that they were good pollinators for food crops. Plus, there's the actual extra advantage of providing wax for candles and honey for consumption. Trying to get this over there. The problem is they don't always stay in the box that you put them in. They cross the ocean as bees in a box, but then they got out. And honeybees that are in a box hive are called managed bees, meaning they are under the care of humans, but they escape the hives and establish feral colonies. They're also transported commercially throughout the nation to pollinate many crops. So here's a story I just found the other day on Facebook. One day, 130 pallets of beehives, that equals millions of honeybees, was being transported to a new pollination site when the truck got a flat tire. It's hot. The bees have been jostled around in this road trip. They are not happy. In order to change the flat tire safely, the bees had to be calmed down. So enter the Gaston, North Carolina Fire Department, and they sprayed cool water on the bees, settling them down so the flat tire could be changed and they could be on their way. If any of the queens escaped, she'd establish a new colony in the wild. And here's a picture of a feral honeybee hive. They could go in trees, they can go in abandoned cars, they can go in attics. They're not too particular about where they're going to make their nest. So you can see how they very easily have gone throughout the nation. Honeybees are really smart. When a bee finds a food source, they go back to the nest to tell the colony where it is. They communicate the direction and the source of the bees by the source of the food by the angles of their bodies, and how far away the source is, you can tell by the duration of the dance. The better the food source, the more rapidly the dance is repeated. So you've got an average of 60,000 bees. You've got one queen per colony laying 2,000 eggs per day, and the queen can live 2 to 5 years. And there are multiple generations per year, and they can travel up to 3 miles. They're capable of commuting floral resource locations. So when you have a waggle dance, the direction that the bee is traveling tells the direction of where the other bees should go, and how far it is and how good the resource is. And if they tell the wrong, um, okay, so sometimes they've got younger bees that are saying this is where you need to go, and older bees will stop them if they're sending them into danger by headbutting the younger bees, because sometimes there'll be a place where they say, oh, this is great food resource, but there will be a danger. And in this case, it would be this crab spider who's eating the bees. And the older bees would see this. And if the younger bees were saying, go to this place, this is great food, and she knows there's a danger, she'll headbutt the other bee. Bumblebees create nests underground or in tree cavities. Abandoned rodent holes are a real favorite of them. A large hive would top out at only 400 individuals. There's one or more queens per nest, so there's not just one queen. And they can be active from February to November, and they're generalist in their foraging. By generalist, I mean they'll get nectar and pollen from pretty much any flower. They infrequently nest in birdhouses, and only one bee in the Willamette Valley nests in birdhouses, and that's the Bombus megalopolis, the Bombus melanopagus, the black-tailed bumblebee. So if you've got a birdhouse with a bumblebee hive in it, you can impress your friends by letting that roll off your tongue. You may never heard of buzz pollination, but chances are you've enjoyed blueberries, cranberries, peppers, potatoes, and tomatoes. Some flowers store their pollen enclosed in the tip of the anthers. And bumblebees and other bee species that can buzz pollinate grab the anther, take a bite out of it, and then rapidly vibrate their wings, which causes the pollen to explode onto the bumblebee. She grooms the pollen on her hairs and puts them in her pollen baskets on her legs. But not every grain is captured, and it's deposited at the next flower. This is why I always plant flowers that bumblebees love around my tomato patch. It's like setting out a smorgasbord for them, and I get a lot more tomatoes. Okay, what's going on here? Did you know bumblebees like to play? In researching bumblebee behavior and intelligence, bumblebees were given an opportunity to play with balls, and they liked it. There's no reward mechanism here. They're just playing with balls. This behavior was most prevalent in young honeybees and males. As the bees matured, they were no longer interested. They can also learn complex behaviors. In this study, they had to push the blue target here out of the way and then push the red target to get to the nectar source right there. They can also learn how to play soccer, which is even more fun. Solitary bees. I often think of solitary bees as the single working mom. She works so hard for her family with no help from others. Unlike social bees, solitary bees only have one generation per year. After she's finished provisioning the nest and laying the eggs, she dies. The next generation won't emerge for another 9 to 10 months. And in many instances, wild bees are even better pollinators than honeybees. So here's a great example of why most of the wild bees are much better pollinators than honeybees. Honeybees are very precise. They land on the flower, they collect the pollen, and they put it in their pollen basket or corbicula, and it's all very tidy and precise. This is a picture on this side of a mason bee, and they do not have corbicula. They just basically have hairs all over their body. And so when they land on a flower, they kind of belly flop into it. And the pollen and the nectar don't mix. It stays dry. The pollen stays dry, and which aids in dispersal when they go to the next flower. And they're homebodies. They only travel about 300 feet from the nest. They're effective pollinators because of their structure. They stay in the local area, and they visit many blossoms in a single area. Here's another example. So here's a bumblebee. Now, bumblebees have corbicula, but they also have very hairy bodies. So that makes them good pollinators, as they're taking what they need for their brood, but then they have hairy bodies which collect a lot of the pollen. And again, here is a female mason bee heading into her nesting tube, and you can see all the pollen she has all over her body. So cavity nesting bees, that's 30% of our native bees. They need dead wood, hollow stems, or brush piles. They usually can't drill holes, but they use holes already existing in wood, bamboo, kiwi, hollow reeds, and other natural cavities. They've been known to use house siding and holes in the tracks of windows. And you can also put out basically nesting tubes and nesting material. But sometimes they make really bad choices in where they put their nests. Any appropriate sized hole will do, but you can tell this is not going to provide a really good progeny for the next year. I'm going to use mason bees as my prime example of cavity nesting bees, largely because many people are familiar with them, and I happen to have a lot of photos and videos of them. This video is of a mason bee packing mud to cap off her nesting tube. Mason bees are easy to manage. They're docile, they're terrific pollinators, and basically need to be cared for only twice a year. Putting the cocoons out in the spring, then cleaning the cocoons in the fall to rid them of parasites and diseases. This is the life cycle of the mason bee, but it's representative of most cavity nesting bees. The bees emerge when the cocoons or the day from their cocoons when the daytime temperatures reach 50 to 55 degrees. Males emerge first, they mate, and then they die. Females collect pollen to provision the nest, and then they lay their eggs in cavities or nesting tubes. The larvae hatch, they eat the pollen ball, and then they spin a cocoon. The larvae transform to fully adult bees by the end of summer. And then they're basically in hibernation until the weather warms up again in the spring. You can see here what it would look like inside a nesting tube. While we're watching these mason bees emerge from their cocoons, I want to take a moment to talk about the responsibility of hosting mason bees or any managed bee. It's so fun to watch the bees emerging in the spring, and because they're not aggressive, you can stand really close to the nesting tubes and watch them work. But as we can see from this photo, it's not always a pretty sight in the tube. You can see there's mites and beetle larvae and chalk brood. There's also parasitic wasps that go in. And we're having a terrible problem with Houdini flies. Now, here's some of the ways that you can have good bee houses and bad bee houses. Holes drilled in the logs are bad. Bamboo is bad because it basically is hard to clean through the year. But tubes that can be cleaned are good. And here's an example of a good way to, if you're going to have mason bees, to manage them, is to have tubes that can be basically that fit inside cardboard tubes that keep them safe. And then these tubes can be taken out and cleaned out. Laminate block is also another really good way to keep mason bees. This is what that looks like at the end of the year, so you can see why you'd want to clean it really well. I personally have switched to using the laminate block with the insert inside there because it's so much easier to clean and I don't have to deal with this mess. Basically, the wood blocks are pretty clean. I started learning about leafcutter bees about 2 years ago, and they're solitary cavity nesting bees, much like mason bees. In our area, mason bees are active from mid-March to the end of May. Leafcutter bees emerge around the beginning of June, and they like soft-petaled flowers like roses and the native Clarkia, also called farewell to spring. In fact, the Clarkia is by far their preferred baby blanket. Last year was my first year for planting Clarkia, and it bloomed from June through October. I actually saw a leafcutter bee cutting flower petals in late October. Depending on the species, leafcutter bees can be cavity nesting or ground nesting. Now, after having dealt with mason bees for years, where you're dealing with a lot of mud and everything, look at how beautiful leafcutter bee cocoons can be. And this is what they look like out of the nesting tubes. So now we're going to talk about ground nesting bees. 70% of native bees are ground nesting. They need access to bare soil. And though they're solitary, some species nest in proximity and share duties. The first time I saw ground nesting bees was when I was weeding my blueberry patch. They're gentle and not aggressive, and they just go about doing their business in pollinating our world. There is even an elementary school here in Portland that has ground nesting bees as their mascot. The Sabin Elementary School here in Portland has thousands of ground nesting bees in their 2-acre playground and athletic field. And from March to May, the bees emerge, and the children and the bees all coexist peacefully. The kids will often let the bees crawl on them, and it tickles. Officially, they are in the mining bee family, but the children have named them ticklebees. So the ticklebees have become the school mascot, and all the kids look forward to March when the bees start emerging. So ground nesting bees come out of a hole, and some people can think, oh my gosh, that's a wasp nest, which is actually a scary thing, or a yellow jacket nest. But the ground nesting bees, the holes are small, much smaller, and you only see one going in and out at a time. Now, there may be several brood cells within that hole, but it's not active like a yellow jacket nest is. Yellow jackets have larger holes and multiple wasps entering and exiting the same hole. So if you see holes in the ground, if they're small, you pretty much don't have to worry about it. These are the gentle ground nesting bees. So now that you have a general idea of where bees nest, let's look at the different kinds of bees you can find in your yard. This graphic shows a wide range of bees, not all from our area, but can give you an idea of the different sizes. Bees come in sizes ranging from about 1/8 inch to almost 1 inch long. While we think of bees as mostly yellow and black, the colors can be metallic blue and greens and highlights of rust and white, and in many different configurations. This photo has many different species of bees, all scaled to be about the same size. So you really can't tell the difference in the sizes of the bee, but it gives you a good idea of the different ways that they look. I can almost guarantee that in Lake Oswego Bee BioBlitz, You'll see the Bosniski's bumblebee, yellow-faced bumblebee. You will see honeybees, of course. And if you look in the right places, you'll see the tiny mining bees. We have several other bumblebees that you'll probably see as well. We have the Bombus mixtus, and we have the black-tailed bumblebee. I just love these guys. They're so cute. And we have this, which is not necessarily, sorry, too fast. Here we go, which is not a bee. And we'll look at that in just a minute. But you would think at first glance, it sure looks like one. Let's talk about the fashion show that all of these bees provide. Here's the Bombus mixtus, the fuzzy horned bumblebees. This is my blue orchard bee. Look at the color on there. This is the green sweat bee, and this is the female, and this is the male. So though it's the same species, they look different. This is the elegant grass-carrying wasp. When I first saw this, I thought that is a scary-looking wasp, and then I learned about them, and they're really fascinating. The day I found this Nevada bumblebee in my yard, I was just delighted. It was huge, and it was just the hair on it was so thick, and it was just an amazing looking bee, and I'd never seen one before. So I was delighted to find this one. Who wore it better? There are a lot. Bees and wasps and flies can all look very, very similar. So this is a hoverfly, and this is a wasp, and it has the same kind of coloration that bees have. So here's some of the not bees. These are flower flies or syrphid flies, and they hover, and they look a lot like bees. Check out the fly on the top right. At first glance, you'd think that's a bumblebee, but take a look at the antenna right here. It's one of the easiest ways I can find for a quick ID. They're very, very small as opposed to a bee antenna that is quite long. Their flight pattern is also distinctive from bees, as the name suggests. They hover rather than going from point to point really efficiently. Here's some more not bees. Wasps come in social and solitary, just like the bees do. And the social wasp species, and these are the ones that can be aggressive and biting, actually are only 1.5% of all wasp varieties, which again is just amazing to me because it's a wasp and you immediately think, oh, this scary. The solitary wasps are the other 98.5% of the wasp species, and they're non-stinging unless you really aggravate them. And all do far more good for humans by controlling pest populations than harm. Here's again the elegant grass-carrying wasp. And here is the side of my house, which is shingles, and they've made a nest in here. What's going on here? So this is a tomato hornworm. And this is the cocoons laid by this little tiny wasp. So basically, the eggs are laid into the caterpillar body by a female wasp, and they hatch. And then the eggs feed on the inside of the caterpillar. And when they're done feeding, the larvae chew a hole in the skin of the caterpillar and then squeeze through and then spin a cocoon. And then the fully spun cocoon will pupate inside and then emerge as an adult. See here. So while this is really kind of creepy looking, it says two things. Number one, wasps can be really beneficial. Number two, tomato hornworms, while truly yucky in my mind, can provide a great place for wasps to live and breed. And because of that, we get wonderful tomatoes. So, welcoming pollinators to our garden. Pollination, bees provide pollination for fruit, flowers, and vegetables, and syrphid flies, or flower flies, and wasps provide pest control and pollination. And you can see here, this is a syrphid fly larvae chomping down on aphids. And here's a wasp taking a caterpillar back to the nest. They chew them up into little pieces and then feed them to their larvae. So I want to go over some bee-friendly strategies so that you can take a look at your yard and see maybe some steps that you can take to create bee habitat. The first thing are planting trees, and it is not the first thing that most people think of in creating bee habitat. But if you think about it, they're able to pack a lot of flowers in kind of a small area. Some of the best pollinator plants in the region are shrubs or trees. These include fruit trees, particularly the cherries and apples, which have abundant nutrition and pollen, and then a lot of our native plants. So there's a book, Native Plants of the Willamette Valley. And some of these native trees are really important. Big leaf maples provide a huge amount of food resources. Vine maples, again, smaller tree that will fit in most yards, but really provide great nutrition. And then the western crabapple, bitter cherry, scholar's willow provides great pollen for bees, but it's also a really prime plant for butterfly caterpillars. They love the scholar's willow. So you want to provide year-round resources. I've seen bumblebees on one of our rare warm days in February. They're usually snoozing under leaf litter or in holes, but when the warmth wakes them up, they come out for a snack. This is why I plant winter blooming heather. The Portland plant list provides different species when different species are in bloom, and that's the thing you can find on the internet. And it's just a great resource. So you want to have things in the spring, things in the summer, fall, and winter are the two challenging ones. But if you do your research, you can have floral resources almost all year round. You also want to plant a variety of shapes and sizes. Longer tongue bees, like the bumblebees and the mason bees, visit complex flowers with bilateral symmetry, and the longer flower lengths, such as vetches and clovers. It is really fun to watch a bumblebee on lupin because they basically land on it, force this keel down, and then get into where the nectar and pollen is. They're one of the few bees that can pollinate lupins because they're so big and strong and they can do this. Short-tongued bees, like the mining bees and the sweat bees, they like easily accessible composite flowers made up of multiple simple flowers, such as the sunflower, the monarda, the bee balm, just a lot of different easy places to land and easy places to get the nectar. To ensure that a broad array of pollinators benefit from plants in urban landscapes, include plants across different plant families with a broad range of flower types. These include plants with disc flowers and urn-shaped flowers and flowers with bilateral symmetry. Some of the plants that we love that have been bred for the fantastic flowers have a lot of petals, are not good for bees because it's hard to get to the resources. So simple is better. Garden Ecology Lab is one of my favorite research things in the whole world. This is from Oregon State University. And basically, they're researching on how your garden can play an important role in bee conservation. And gardeners looking to support wild bees should include native plants that are highly attractive to many different bee species. And the Garden Ecology Lab recommend the 10 native plants highlighted: Verilifacilia globigilla, Douglas aster, California poppy, farewell to spring. We've talked about that for the leafcutter bees, lavender, rose checker mallow, the common mattia, goldenrod, Oregon sunshine, and yarrow. And you can see how the different flowers are attractive to different bee species. Look at the Douglas aster and how popular that particular flower is. Um, it's just one of the best plants you can plant. And once you plant it, you've got it a lot of places because it does tend to seed, but it's pretty easy to pull up. And about this time of year, I cut them way back so that they don't get so tall and rangy. And I get more flowers that way too. Most native bees have a limited area that they thrive in, typically about the size of a football field. By planting floral resources in groups of the same flower, they can move from flower to flower more efficiently. I think of it as like the corner grocery store versus Costco. Not everybody can drive to Costco and load up with all the different kinds of things like a honeybee can. Their native bees need to keep things really close by. And so plant in blocks of flowers. This is actually fireweed, which I did not plant. It planted itself. But you see, I've got a big swath of it. And then later on, we've got aster and rudbeckia coming in, cold flowers, that kind of thing. Provide water. Bees have to have a surface to rest on while they're getting water. Otherwise, they'll drown. I have experience with this. It was not pretty. My mason bees hatched, and I had a bird bath out, and it was the closest water that they saw. And a lot of them drowned before I noticed it and could push them out and then get rocks in there so that they could be safe. Here are some simple and effective options to accommodate twig and stem nesting bees in the garden. When pruning shrubs, note those that have hollow or pithy cores, and some twig nesting bees use these substrates instead of cutting dead stems to the ground when you're pruning or thinning. Leave a foot-long stub for the bees. Small carpenter bees will excavate nest cavities in dead pithy canes or raspberries and roses. Have dry soil with no mulch. And I know that, we're basically trained to say mulch, 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 looks pretty, keeps the weeds down and everything. But our native bees need some bare ground. So I usually leave some in the back of the garden that is not necessarily easily seen so that it doesn't look unkempt, but it gives a good place. Rock, little stone piles and sandy soil are always good too. And then you can have fabricated nesting materials like bee box and cardboard tubes and liners that we talked about. So here's a good example of multi-use real estate. We've got pithy stems from the sedum, rotting logs, which is another place where you've got holes where bees are going to want to basically lay their eggs. There's some bare ground under here that's hard to see. And then there's some water right behind her with very shallow water and stones so that they can get a drink. So this is basically a 2 foot by 2 foot section, and it's got almost everything bees need. Number 6 is to minimize your lawn. My recommendation is to start small. Just take one area, small area, and you can take out the grass or have the kill the grass and then plant ground covers and wildflower mixes, something that's really going to support pollinators. And this is an example. This was my house in 2012, and you can see all the kind of sketchy lawn that we had. It was lawn and blackberries, basically. This is what it was like in 2023. And then we took out all of this section that year and in 2024. And this is now all a pollinator garden. One of the advantages of having the pollinator garden right here is that my vegetable garden is right here and the orchard is along the side. So I've got just everything one-stop shopping for my bees to not only feed them, but help feed us too. And then embrace a more relaxed landscape. Leaves are a tremendous resource of mulch for your garden and free housing for invertebrates. You can rake them into the garden beds instead of disposing of them if you have lawn that you want the leaves off. But if you don't have lawn, just leave them where the leaves are. Do not use a shredder on leaves. Because basically, if you're shredding the leaves, you're shredding the bees and the caterpillars and the cocoons. Just leave it. It's so much easier. And then you can use prunings from your trees and shrubs and pithy plant stems and make brush piles, which is another great place for bee habitat. And one of the easiest things you can do is create a no pesticide zone. You see this? Selective pesticides, butterfly and ladybird friendly, and kills only ugly bugs. Yeah, that's not a thing. Pesticides rarely solve the problem and it allows pests to flourish. So basically, if you kill the pesticides, there's nothing for the if you kill the bugs that are bothering you, there's nothing for the predators to eat. So, like if you get rid of all the aphids, you're killing off the hoverflies and the ladybugs because that's their food source. So, you kill those off. The aphids come back and there's no predator then to take care of them. So, really, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot when you're using pesticides. Um, Eco-friendly alternatives are often simple, basically providing good habitat for their predators. Having a few holes in your plants is a sign of a thriving ecosystem. Pesticides free is good for bees. Have to tell you, I used to see something like this and go, oh no. And now I see something like this and I go, oh yay. This is a happy garden. I've got everybody working along together. And another really important thing and kind of a hidden pesticide is the neonics. And basically, that is a pesticide that's treated, that plants are treated with, and it's basically systemic. So, yes, it will kill the aphids and the whiteflies and the beetles and the mealybugs and all that. But then it can also kill the other invertebrates that happen to be feasting on it. So when you shop for plants, don't get this. Find plants that are neonicotinoid free. I've have a lot of resources that I've used to put this together, and I wanted to share them with you. You can go to my website, The Abundant Bees. You can follow that QR code, and you can check out all of the resources and be inspired. And now Celeste is going to give you some more information on how you can become an advocate for pollinators.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. All right, how am I looking, Megan? You can give me a thumbs up? All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Celeste May-Francois. I am the State Director of Environment Oregon. We're a statewide environmental advocacy organization with one mission to restore and protect the natural world. What's that? Is there a problem?
I can, no.
Oh, okay, sorry. Great. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to Megan and Leah for inviting me to speak on this webinar about our advocacy efforts to save the bees and other pollinators.
And I'm just feeling so inspired after Leah's presentation. Really got me thinking about what I can do in my own garden to protect pollinators and make my garden a bee paradise. So thank you so much, Leah, for all of that amazing information. At the risk of being potentially somewhat repetitive to some of what Leah covered, I just wanted to start with a brief big picture overview of the importance of bees, talk about one of the threats that they're facing, and then what we can do about it here in Oregon and beyond. Okay. So just to start, as we've just heard from Leah, bees are amazing. They're one of the oldest creatures on the planet. They've been around for 100 million years. One of the coolest things I've learned about bees is that they actually co-evolved with flowers, and that's how they've developed such a symbiotic relationship. And today, bees play a really crucial role in our lives, not just in our gardens and in agriculture, but throughout nature. 90% of flowering plants need animal pollinators. But as our climate is changing and human development is encroaching on more of nature, and as our society uses more pesticides, pollinator populations are plummeting. And this is especially true for bees. So the American bumblebee once had a huge range buzzing from flower to flower in much of North America, from Pennsylvania to Wyoming and Texas to North Dakota. And while still found in its southern range, the American bumblebee has gone missing across its northernmost and westernmost range. Another native bee that once covered the Midwest and beyond, the rusty patched bumblebee, is already on the endangered species list. It has disappeared across 87% of its range. In Oregon, the western bumblebee and Franklin's bumblebee are following similar sinking trajectories. In total, 1 in 4 bumblebee species is considered vulnerable to extinction. Out of 4,000 native bee species in the US, there are more than 500 that are native to Oregon. And with many on decline, scientists are probing to kind of have a better understanding of what's happening. And the answer is climate change, disease, habitat loss, and pesticides, and in particular, one that was designed to kill insects. So, as Leah mentioned, there is a class of insecticides called neonicotinoids, which I'm just going to call neonics, which was introduced in the 1990s. And usage really soared in the 2000s due to the practice of actually coating the insecticide onto seeds. But that isn't the only way that this toxic insecticide is applied. It's also sprayed directly onto the plant. And these insecticides are systemic, meaning that they're absorbed by plants through their roots when applied. And then as the plant grows, it takes in the insecticide, making its nectar, pollen, leaves, stems, and fruit toxic to insects, basically making the entire plant a threat to bees. And when bees come into contact with neonics, it can be lethal, but not always. When death isn't immediate, non-lethal exposure causes other problems for bees. So baby bumblebee brains are damaged, bees can't navigate properly, reproduction is impaired, and much more. In 2013, neonics were sprayed on flowering linden trees here in Wilsonville. Some of you may remember that. It resulted in the largest native bee kill ever recorded when 25,000 bees dropped dead in a Target parking lot after they were exposed to these toxic chemicals. But unfortunately, this class of insecticide is still widely available for everyday consumers to purchase and use. And without urgent action, major declines in bee populations threaten biodiversity, our food security, and Oregon's natural heritage. And so the solution is that we just need to stop using these bee-killing pesticides. And one way to do that is to pass a state-level policy to restrict its use. So Environment Oregon worked with Beyond Toxics, Center for Food Safety, and Xerces Society during the 2025 legislative session here in Oregon to put some restrictions in place for the residential use of neonics with House Bill 2679. Specifically, the bill would have required a pesticide applicator license to purchase and apply neonics, and it would have restricted their use on residential properties with limited exceptions. So in Leah's example, it would have made it hard, you wouldn't have had to know what a neonic was when you're purchasing your plants. It just wouldn't have been available. The bill did not address the agricultural use of neonics. We wanted to start with residential use as the first step to restricting neonics. Addressing the agricultural use of neonics is a much bigger political lift. So we thought we should start with residential use. Requiring a pesticide applicator license to purchase and apply neonics, we think is a common sense statewide solution that would keep these dangerous products out of the hands of people that might not understand the impact that they can have on pollinators. Despite Oregonians showing their love for the bees during the 2025 legislative session, including our volunteers delivering Love Your Pollinators Valentines to legislators for Valentine's Day, the bill died in committee. So that's unfortunate, but we are not giving up. So we are, with our coalition, doubling down on our efforts and really focusing our attention to build a stronger coalition, connect with a broader audience, and generate a louder buzz of grassroots support to ensure that only licensed pesticide applicators can be using neonics. Just this past Monday, we launched our summer canvas campaign where we'll be out in communities talking to Oregonians about the threats facing Oregon's pollinators and building public support for restricting the use of bee-killing pesticides. Whether we're connecting with gardeners or academics or people at farmers markets or just everyday Oregonians at their doorstep, students from elementary school all the way up to the college level, we've just seen a real outpouring of enthusiastic support for restricting the use of these toxic insecticides to help save the bees. And we know that if we're able to get enough public support and if legislators hear from enough of their constituents, we can win. So if we're able to pass a bill restricting the consumer use of neonics, it would be such a big step towards reducing their prevalence in backyards, gardens, and other areas where bees forage. A similar bill has passed in 12 other states, including Maine, New Jersey, California, and most recently, Washington State. And so we want to make Oregon the 13th state to pass these restrictions because protecting pollinators isn't just about saving the bees. It's about safeguarding Oregon's ecosystems, agriculture, and environmental legacy. And we're working for a future where bees can thrive and our natural world can flourish. So here's a link to our petition that you can sign to Oregon state legislators, urging them to restrict bee-killing pesticides. So you can use the QR code or the link here, which will take you to our action. You can customize your message, and then when you hit send, it'll just send directly to your legislators. If you don't want to take our action, I would encourage you also to just send an email to your legislators if this is an issue that you care about and let them know that you want them to take action to save the bees and tell them why you care about this issue. Because really, the more that we can be joining our voices together, the more legislators will take this issue seriously. And hopefully, the more likely it is that they will take action to save the bees here in Oregon and across the country. So thanks so much. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you both, Leah and Celeste, for being here tonight. I want to remind everybody that tonight's webinar was the kickoff for our Bee BioBlitz series. We have the upcoming Bee BioBlitz in the community, June 7th and 8th. It's an event where we invite the community to participate in documenting the pollinators of Lake Oswego using the iNaturalist app. The event begins with a in-person session at Lake Oswego High School in collaboration with the Lake Oswego High School Green Team on June 7th at 10 in the morning. At this event, participants can learn how to use iNaturalist, and there will also be an opportunity to walk to Leah Puhlman's garden and check out pollinator habitat in action. The registration is free. I just posted some links in the chat. So next up, let's get to some questions. Somebody asked if flowering cherries are as good a pollen source as fruiting cherries.
Yes, they are.
Great.
Simple.
Nice and easy. I had a question. When you are leaving shrubs or plants, that have like the cavity on purpose to,
Mhm.
in your landscape and not doing early season pruning. How long, like, at what point have most of the pollinators used that habitat?
That's a really interesting question, and I just learned a little bit more about it this past couple of weeks. Basically, if you can stand it, so in the fall, you can cut your stems down to 12 to 18 inches. And then if you can just be patient and leave them until the new growth kind of covers them up, because there would be bee cocoons necessarily, in there, and you're not quite sure when they're coming out. But then if they would also be available for new female bees to lay their eggs in. So say like it's springtime and mason bees are looking for places to lay eggs, they could use those stems as well. So in theory, leaving them all the time is great, and just letting the new leaves cover it up. But if you have to cut it down, you can cut it down, and you can take them and you can put them like in a brush pile or just in a bundle off in your garden somewhere. And that also provides a place for them.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There weren't a lot of other questions in the chat, so if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But I'll lead with one more question. You mentioned having the water out with the shallow water, Leah.
Mhm.
Does it make sense to have multiple places because some of the bees can't fly as far?
For basically a yard, it's not, yes, I think that would be a good idea.
Okay.
But most of our yards are not huge enough that it's like, oh, I can't get to there.
Okay.
Um, I have a half acre, so I have a water source in my backyard. I actually have a couple. I've got a water feature that I've adapted for bees. And then in the front yard, I have a water source again, just because in my mind, they're two separate places. I don't know that the bees think of it that way. But I also make sure, especially sure when it gets really hot, if it gets really hot, make sure absolutely to refill that water dish twice a day if need be. Because if it's really hot, this is the only place they can get water if we provide it, if they're in our yard. So yeah, I think having multiples would be a good idea.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Well, I have one more then. I'm just wondering if I know that the honeybees is where we humans get our honey and our wax from. I'm wondering if there are any other bee species that that we can support that are local that would, supply those
No,
products?
no,
No?
no. That's the honeybees are basically where you're going to get honey and wax. But even the bumblebees, which are the other social bees that it would require to make that, the honeycombs and stuff, they do not they do not provide wax and honey. It's just, they just don't. If you come to my yard at the Bee BioBlitz, I have a bumblebee nest that I pulled out from the Oregon Zoo this year. It was done. And so you can see what the inside of a honeybee nest looked like, which is kind of fun.
That is fun. So thank you again, Celeste and Leah. I'm going to stop recording at this point, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.